Penguin Random House presents The ISIS Peril, the world's most feared terror group and its shadow on South Asia, by Kabir Taneja, read by Abhishek Ajay Sharma. Advance praise for the book. In recent years, increasing militant activity through the South Asian region has strengthened, rather than diminished, the premise that there is a strong presence of the Islamic State within the subcontinent, an area already deeply fraught with religious tension and political undercurrents. In this valuable book, Kabir Taneja articulates these concerns and challenges with an inside view and painstaking research. His insights and analysis do a great deal to expand our understanding of this global threat closer home, and, indeed, to open our eyes to the footprints already in the sand. This is a chilling account, essential reading for anyone interested in understanding the risks. By S. Hussain Zaidi, best-selling author and journalist. In his book, The ISIS Peril, Kabir Taneja takes us through the rise of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria to its inevitable spread outward to the point of threatening with a presence in parts of India. He traces the rise of ISIS from the aftermath of the U.S. attack on Iraq in 2003, the online indoctrination of some Indians, while others joined the movement for the caliphate, the sophisticated online campaigns and the appearance of ISIS flags in Kashmir, which was an inevitable outcome of yet another failed military intervention by the U.S. Taneja highlights the psychology of South Asian jihadists from the Holy Bakery attack of 2016 in Bangladesh to the Easter weekend 2019 in Sri Lanka, underlining the threat to South Asia. In the process, Taneja deconstructs its strengths, exposes the movement's fault lines, and throughout maintains an intelligent, engaging, and analytical narrative on the geopolitical consequences of ignoring the ISIS peril. In India, we seem to have largely underplayed the looming threat as we remain complacent. This well-researched and lucidly written book, one hopes, would help us understand the nature of the threat, where even a military defeat of the ISIS will not be enough to remove the long-term threat, says Vikram Sood, former head, Research and Analysis Wing, RAW. In studies of the terror that ISIS and other pan-Islamist terror organizations unleash, it is easy to miss the basic contradiction that while ISIS claims to represent the cause of Islam, the largest number of its victims belong to the Muslim faith, and that several parts of the world where Islam's followers reside, like South Asia, haven't actually seen ISIS and Qaeda gain much traction. Kabir Taneja's book is a refreshing read, among the first of its kind, looking clinically and with evidence at ISIS's desire to spread to the region, particularly India, and the real truth of its limited success thus far, says Suhasini Haider, National Editor and Diplomatic Affairs Editor of The Hindu. To my parents, Narendra Taneja and Rasham Taneja. War was always here. Before man was, war waited for him. The ultimate trade waiting for its ultimate practitioner. By Cormac McCarthy. Blood Meridian, 1985. Introduction. In 2013, as a reporter with a small Delhi-based weekly newspaper covering foreign affairs, I got interested in a small part of the Middle East that was going through a conflict between certain groups. A conflict that had started to get a lot of traction on social media. At the time, the fallout, if you will, of the Arab Spring in the region was hogging most of the Western media space, with drastic political changes in the offing in the extended region. Given the tyranny of distance prevalent in the Indian media, or simply its reluctance to spend on actual reporting, wanted to look into what was happening in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, specifically in Iraq and Syria, was not a very sellable idea. But oddly, it was this small newspaper that could afford giving space to what would become the biggest story in foreign policy, national and international security, and terrorism in the world over the next few years, with the rise of the terror group ISIS and its brand of terror that could be beamed into our living rooms rent-free. It is not a big threat to India, Not sure why you're trying to portray it as one here, a senior Indian official told me as I tried to report on Indian preparedness, specifically when it came to the internet. However, it quickly became glaringly obvious how effectively the internet was being used to sell a bizarre concoction of Islamist ideologies and almost a make-believe land with the promise of purity and piousness for the Muslim world, away from the ills of Western and other civilizations. The Russian campaign in Syria against ISIS found a lot of takers during this period. As I reported on the rise of ISIS in the region, former and serving diplomats backed and at times marveled at Moscow's air campaign against ISIS in Syria. This sentiment was inspired in part by a post-Cold War hangover and a disdain for United States of America under Donald Trump. In 2017, as the dust around the Arab Spring settled, powers that were wishing for the demise of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's regime started to reflect that this outcome was getting unlikelier day by day. In New Delhi, the ambassador of Syria, Dr. Riyad Kamal Abbas, who gained his higher education from India, addressed a gathering of thinkers, journalists, writers and students interested in foreign policy to apprise them of the situation back home. This was not an easy time to do this, with reports of chemical weapons being used by the Assad regime on his own people doing the rounds and creating an international outcry against an already embattled presidency. This address by Dr. Abbas could have been a spectacle, with strict and pointed questions, but instead many of the former, older diplomats ended up sympathizing with Syria, backing the regime mostly against U.S. misadventures in the region and the general approach Washington has had in the Middle East over the decades. Sensing the room as being in their favor, the Syrian delegation ended up fielding mostly light questions. The scene was perplexing, to say the least. They're bastards. One former Indian diplomat who has extensively dealt with the Middle East told me about how he saw the Americans and their influence in the region. Nonetheless, both the USA and Russia were fighting ISIS to defeat the terror group and simultaneously working in their own geopolitical interests in the region, with the former looking to cement its hold and the latter looking to uproot U.S. hegemony. This was still the period when ISIS and its sympathizers were mostly running amok in Iraq and Syria, and its effect were being felt in Europe, which was tackling a giant wave of migrants fleeing war in the region. South Asia was always expected to be a big target due to its large Muslim population, for the threat ISIS posed was the product it was selling, and not necessarily the group itself, a peril further amplified by the security agencies' undermining of its online presence and the dangers it posed. ISIS marketing its ideology well was the threat, and security agencies, used to seeing the defeat of terror as only being possible from behind the trigger of a gun, took their own time to finally come to a realization that the terror group had changed the DNA of Islamist jihad itself. Terror was no more the same as the kind the security agencies had been trained to defeat. Hierarchies, organizations, chiefs and leaders, all these traditional aspects of terrorism were demolished by ISIS. The era of do-it-yourself terror had started, and in South Asia, a small nation was going to be the most unexpected venue of one of the biggest pro-ISIS attacks in the world. Easter weekend, April 2019. The island nation of Sri Lanka was getting ready to celebrate the long weekend. It's the island mentality. People from the small country in the Indian Ocean, ironically shaped like a water drop, would often say when asked how they are so laid back. It was not always so on this tropical island. The year 2009 saw the end of one of the most gruesome and bloody civil wars known to mankind, as the Sri Lankan state defeated the Tamil terror group known as the Liberation Tigers of Tamilalam, or LTTE. The Tamil group, fighting a secessionist battle for an independent Tamil state in Sri Lanka's north, is still considered by many as the most fearsome and well-organized terror group to have ever existed, even more so than Al-Qaeda and now ISIS. On
Sample complete. Ready to continue?